Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over and our Story-Ented segment, where we talk to some of the best authors writing for kids and kids at heart. He's the best-selling author of 9 novels for children, including the 100 Cupboards Trilogy and the Ashtown Burial series. He also joins us tonight to talk about the craft of story writing, literacy, and his latest book, the first in a brand new series, Outlaws of Time, the legend of Sam Miracle. Please welcome best-selling author N.D. Wilson. Nate, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure to see you. What great work. I want to talk for a moment about your background. Your father, who was a pastor, used to read at the dinner table to you all, to you and your 2 sisters. How did that begin to shape you and form you as a writer, as a person?
You know, it's really difficult for me to even try to answer because I don't know what it was like to not have that. So now that I have my own children and I tell them stories and we read together, I can kind of get a better sense of what my father really did and the impact that it had on me. So it wasn't just my father, my mom telling me stories at bedtime, making stories up. Ours was a family of storytelling.
They're both writers. These are both writers.
My mom's an English teacher, so her writing is practical instruction, and she even has a little English, textbook that she's done. My dad is a pastor, so a lot of theology, philosophy, that kind of thing. But at home, it was C.S. Lewis and Tolkien.
Those were your 2
growing up, those were the early catechisms of my youth. And what is nobility? What is sacrifice? What is courage? What is love, actually? What is honor? And all that's from Lewis and Tolkien. And then later on, when there's actually more just practical instruction on the nature of the world. It all fit in the grain of those stories that I've been told.
No, it's almost like composting. All that stuff settles down and turns into something rich. Or, in my vernacular, being a New Orleanian, it's gumbo. You throw everything in, it cooks down. I love the idea, and I read it somewhere, where you just mentioned Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, of course, the great British giants of this literature, fantasy literature, literature for children and adults, I think. But you felt that Americans needed a shot at magic and mythology and a sense of wonder. Tell me about how that informed your work and what you're doing now.
Well, it started for me because I had a fantastic rural childhood in Idaho. In the wheat fields of Idaho, crop dusters floating down streams.
Wow.
Climbing around in big red barns.
All the big adventures kids
baseball,
crave.
Barbecue, and then everything wonderful that happens in the great outdoors. But I felt like I did not have a magical childhood. I did not live in a magical place because the stories I read were British.
Far away.
They were English writers for English children. And so I could have a fantastic day in the wheat field with my Red Ryder BB gun and go home and sort of sigh and say, like, oh, I wish I lived somewhere amazing like Narnia. And so later when I started actually writing stories, I really wanted to write stories for Western kids with an American mythology that would make them excited to run out their back door. I didn't want any kids to read my books and then sit there sad about their own lives or go play games with dice in the basement. I wanted kids to read my books and then run outside and look at the dandelions and the stars.
Experience creation in a new way.
The wind. I mean, we live in such a magical place. I tell kids in every school visit, they live on a ball of lava going around a star at Mach 86. And that star is so powerful that the starlight makes forests and grass and fruit. And that's where we live. That's the world in which we live. So I tell them if they took Frodo Baggins home for an afternoon, he would tell them at the end of that afternoon, I wish I lived in a magical world like you. So I want to wake readers up to this place, to the struggles of their time, of their stories, and have them be really fed and strengthened as characters in their own.
What's that great Chesterton line? The world is filled with wonders, but starved for wonder.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you really do rekindle that in your work. And it being set in America means something. With apologies to our UK and Irish viewers, and I love you all. And Nate does too.
I mean, the Brits, I have nothing against the Brits at all, of course. The only thing is, they have plenty of fantastic fiction already.
That's right.
It's not that I want to starve them.
They've had their fill.
It's not that I want to starve them. It's that they are well fed.
Look, even Ms. Rowling is following your lead because she's coming to the new world now. So there. Let's talk for a minute about this new book, Outlaws in Time. Where did this come from? It was born of a nightmare.
It was, actually, and I was trying to come up with a superhero story, a true, not a story with tights, That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for the authentic Old Testament Samson, old superhero story.
Classic superhero.
A classic superhero story that also gave us the type of the lone law dog in the Old West. So the Old Western stories with that one outsider who comes in and takes on the troubles of others that aren't really his, they're not really his problems. That is the same classic superhero template. I wanted that, and I could not come up with a character until, luckily, my temperature went up high enough one night. I crested 104, 105.
All right.
Fell asleep and dreamt that I had my arms destroyed, was dragged into a cave in the Arizona desert, and had my arms saved by an old man who grafted live rattlesnakes into my arms.
Into your arms,
So,
which is what happens to Sam in the book.
So I woke up thinking I had rattlesnakes in my hands.
Oh my God.
And then as soon as I realized I didn't, I realized I had it. It'd been about 2 years coming, looking for the story. I gathered up my 5 children, did a little focus group.
Yeah. Oh, this is what I do. Focus groups are the best.
Told them a story around the dinner table. I was like, I got a story about this boy named Sam Miracle, and his left hand, Cindy the rattlesnake, is evil and wants to kill him, and he has to learn to control her, sitting on her. Like she's evil, and his right hand Speck is always distracted, ADD, wandering off, and so he has to, and won't hurt anyone. So Speck won't hurt anybody. Cindy wants to kill everything.
Wow.
On his right and his left, and watching him grow into mastery of his own desires. Really, there's a lot going on under the surface of that.
Well, yeah,
but it's just it is an old Western time hopping.
Yeah, where did the time
story.
travel come from? Okay, because this time travel is very difficult. Now, you pull it off beautifully, but I'm thinking, I look at this as a writer and I go, this is a nightmare of construction. Because you've got this Navajo priest, time walker, and he is trying to presage where the bad time walker is. There's a guy trying to kill Sam. I'll just ruin a little bit of it for people. I won't spoil it all. And he is trying to time hop with these kids to protect them, trying to presage and get ahead of the horrible things that are about to befall them. Where did the time travel thing come from? And why make that kind of obstacle for yourself as a writer?
Well, I've done this for a little while. And the attraction of this story to me was very especially the difficulty. So I've done stories about little magic doors in the wall. I've done the Order of Explorers. I've done things like that. And there are 2 major attractions where trying to write a character who has separate consciousnesses in each hand.
Pulling him apart.
So in one scene, he's there, but his one hand is trying to impose one will and the other another. And working to try to navigate that as a writer was very difficult and very fun.
Yep.
The time travel piece was, I really didn't want to pocket this into one period.
Genre or...
I didn't want this to be a Western, and I didn't want this to be a modern superhero story. I wanted this story to be timeless. And as I was trying to tap into the timelessness of this particular struggle between good and evil, who rules the image of God, who rules the future, who rules the destiny of man, that struggle is so much bigger than a moment. And as I tried to capture that, that timelessness, is like, well, time fell off. That's how it became a time travel story.
I see.
They move through periods of time. Also, the nature of sacrifice and death and living well. That theme in particular, what it means to lay down your life, that the time travel offered a fantastic opportunity to explore that.
There is a through line here between the Ashtown Burial series. You have there an Irish monk with a mohawk who helps the kids in that
Brother
particular
Niffy,
story. Brother Niffy. Here you have Father Tiempo, who is a time-traveling Navajo priest. What is the through line here with these religious figures? What is their importance that runs through these works?
If I'm just going to roll my cards, just dump them on the table and give people a glimpse into the sausage being made, I really enjoy the complexity of the good guys. When you are playing for the villains, your job is very simple.
Yeah, it really is.
You decide that you are well-intentioned, what you're doing is best for everybody else, and you begin to try to impose that forcibly. But on the side of the good, there's always a level of freedom. And that freedom brings the freedom to rot, to decay, to take things for granted, to not do what you should do. And so the good guys are always fairly disorganized and not nearly as on one page.
Methodical as the
So
villains.
I wanted to write stories about good institutions that had grown moss and were falling apart. The Order of Brendan and Ashtown Burials. You have Father Tiempo, who's really trying to serve something ancient, and yet he feels so very, very alone. But I wanted to make him a priest so that I'm revealing he's part of something much bigger. He's not just a lone guy in the desert, and that's why he's Father Tiempo. I also just wanted him to be Father Time.
Yeah, the man alone who's Father Time.
Yeah.
You wrote a piece recently about why scary stories are important for kids, because there are some frights in this book, and let's admit it, having talked to probably tens of thousands of kids between us, kids love to be frightened a little bit. They like the scare. Why is it important? Some people go, oh, we don't need any frights. We don't need to see the darkness. We don't need to see the demons. We don't want to see that.
Yeah.
You would say what?
Two major things. One is just practical. Do you want healthy children or not? You know, if you bubble your child and keep them from anything frightening, into what world do you think you are raising them?
Right. Well, where are they going to go someday?
They're going to be released into this world, and this world is full of terrors and horrors, you know, a variety of darkness. So if you want to prepare them, catechize them. If you want to prepare them, feed them for the journey, like feed them for what they're going to be undertaking. And giving them an opportunity to vicariously experience fear and vicariously experience courage is a fantastically healthy thing. I've used it very, very particularly, I mentioned it in the article for the Atlantic Monthly, with my own children when they struggled with nightmares. I would find out what the villain was, I would really try to figure out where the fear was, and I would tell them a scary story. But it'd be a scary story, not a horror story, but a scary story in which good triumphed, in which they were empowered and enabled to address it. That's part one. Part two is, I think if you don't cast the darkness in your stories in a realistic ratio to the light, then you are lying about the light.
To the kids, yeah.
So if you don't have fear, if you don't have evil, you are also lying about sacrifice and love and courage. If you make the villain some, you know, Papa Smurf with horns, as horrifying as that is.
Yeah, that's pretty scary already.
So if the villain is Papa Smurf with horns, then the kind of courage required to face that villain is nothing much.
Right.
When you have true darkness, when you have true fear, you can also show true sacrifice, the passion. You can show the willingness to lay down a life, the willingness to go into the valley of the shadow of death and fear no evil. That's the whole point. In order to fear no evil, if you mitigate the evil, there's nothing much to that, right?
No, I agree.
That's why. So to really communicate the depth of and the power of the light, but also to pragmatically equip kids to be fantastic characters in their own stories.
I agree. There are some questions I ask every author who sits here for a Story-Ented segment. These are rapid fire, but take as long as you like.
Okay.
Your favorite children's book and why?
The Two Towers.
Oh.
And I would say it's a children's book because he wrote those stories for his children.
Yeah.
And I love The Two Towers because it captures those truly bittersweet moments of victory through sacrifice.
Tell me your least favorite book.
Oh, man.
Not a trick question.
There was a book, the first time I ever stayed up all night reading a book, it was a horrible little Crusader historical fiction novel. I don't remember if it was called The Black Rose, but I think it might have been. And I had not yet learned the ability to stop reading a book.
Oh, so you had to finish it.
And I started it and I hated it. And I was like, I can't pull out. I have to exit out.
I have to finish this.
Exit out the rear. And so I stayed up all night. I read it that night. I got through it and I was like, oh, I hated that. My dad opened my door. It was time to go to school. He opened the door and looked in and the lights were on. And he looked at me and said, did you stay up all night? I said, yes. He's like, what were you doing? I was like, reading this horrible
monstrosity in the corner there.
And he just told me, like, don't do that again. It was like it was a school night. They never thought they had to tell me not to stay up all night reading. Okay. So yeah, that one.
We have a tagline for the Story-Ented site, which is my literacy initiative, and it is find your story, find your way. What was the story that furnished you with the greatest lesson that you take even into life today? And what was the lesson? Okay,
there's so many, and all of them have to do with my parents, probably. But once my dad bought some land, this is the way my father is.
So it's a real story. It's not even a fictional book.
Yeah, this is the real one that continues to shape me. If I said fictional, it'd probably be bedtime stories from my mom, Lewis Tolkien. My dad wrote me a little book called Undertown. There's one copy of it. He wrote it, gave it to me. That's it. That one. So there's a lot.
Yeah.
But my dad bought some land. He wanted to build a house. the kind of guy he is he never fears small beginnings. He just gets started. And so he bought a book called How to Build a House. Like it was, here we go. So in junior high, I spent a lot of time out on that land with him. And
building a house.
Yeah, but when we didn't have the money to do it, because he was a pastor, we would still go out there and work on the land. And we would just be working. And I remember maybe on the 4th consecutive day, it might have been more than that, in which I was raking gravel. And we had a gravel pad inside our foundation. We had the concrete walls. We were just raking the gravel and packing it down, and raking the gravel and packing it down. And I asked him, like, why am I doing this? Like, why? You know, it's like the gravel, it's raked. Like, it has been raked. He told me, he's like, well, because I have gravel and I have a rake. And so if that's what I have in front of me,
that's what I'm going to use.
I will be faithful with that. And I will be sitting here raking gravel, saying to God,
What's next?
Look at what I'm doing with this rake. You gave me a rake, you gave me rocks. So I'm raking the rocks. If you give me something else,
I'm waiting for the next
I'm ready.
moment.
And that struck me. I was probably in 8th grade, and that has struck me throughout my career over and over and over again when I'm thinking, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my call in this moment, this month, this summer? And I have spent a lot of time raking rocks.
Living in the present moment.
Yeah, just like what do I have? I've got a rake, and he's given me rocks, so that's what I'm going to do.
Where do you write and why?
I write in a loft in my house above an outdoor porch, kind of sticks out. I write there because I built it for that purpose. There's a little spiral staircase that goes up from my bedroom to this writer's loft, and many good things have happened there.
A roost,
Yep.
a little roost.
A writer's roost.
Where do your best ideas come from?
From compost. I mean, from the compost of scripture, from the compost of history, mythologies, you know, ancient literature.
It all starts to weave together.
Yeah, it all starts there. I say compost a whole bunch of great books, classics, Old Testament stories, pagan mythologies, all sorts of things. Just compost it all together, and then sit in a really hot shower in the dark, and voila, you're going to have something.
Let it ferment. Check in with me 6 months from now.
Yeah, there's going to be something.
Tell me, if you could pick a writing mentor, dead or alive, it would be whom?
That's tough. That's really tough, because I would immediately drift. I'd want to drift to, you know, the Oxford boys.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be far. If I could make them answer any question, probably Mark Twain.
Mark Twain.
Yeah.
Of course, you'd go with the American.
If I could force him to answer any question, if I knew that he was going to be himself and not answer my questions,
you wouldn't answer any of your questions.
I would go somewhere else.
Back to the pub with Lewis and
because he would actually
Tolkien.
try to help me.
Well, they tried to help each other.
Exactly.
They had some titanic battles, though, in that room.
Yes, they did.
Between them. Advice to parents trying to get their kids to read. What do you suggest? What do you do with your own children?
If you're struggling to get a kid to read aloud. And I have another personal story here where I became a very picky reader.
Yep.
And it was just Lewis Tolkien.
You were reading the same
stuff. It was
stuff
like to
over
a
and over
fault
again.
now. Like I wouldn't read other things. I would just read the books I knew I already loved. I didn't want to risk not liking something, waste that time. I'd even just go read the same chapters over and over.
My gosh.
And finally my mom sat me down on the couch and she picked up a book called King Solomon's Mines. She flipped to the center of it, to this particularly brutal, violent chapter called The Witch Hunt. Drums beating, witch dancing, Zulu warriors lined up, you know, waiting to see which of them will be executed.
Yeah.
And she's reading this to me. I was 12. My mother's reading this to me out loud. And then she stops right in the middle, and she just puts the book down. Says, you don't like to read anyway. She walks off. Well, I mean, you know what happened. There goes the book. If you have a kid struggling to read, don't try to read them something important. Don't try to read them something serious. Read them something that will grab them
by the throat
in a true story grip, intense way. Read them something action-packed and scary, and stop, and then hand them the book.
Final question quickly. Are you a gardener or an architect, as Mr. Martin says, George Martin says, writers are either gardeners or architects. You are which?
I think I'm an architect that fills everything with dirt.
You outline everything before you start?
I do it on a napkin.
So you don't do a full, it's kind of a floating outline.
I do an outline. I plan a road trip from Seattle to Miami, and I'll say, I'm going to do this in 3 days or 4 days. I will do an outline for my book that is 5 beats total. I know what the beginning is, I know what the middle is, I know what the end is. I know the middle of the beginning, I know the middle of the end.
That's it.
And then before each chapter, I'll do the same thing for each chapter. And so I fill it in brick by brick, and by the end, I'll have a ton of outlines. But I know that the decision-making process
is in the moment.
Is going to be in the moment. I can't possibly choose which fork in the road to go.
Right.
Like to go down now.
Right.
I need to know what my destination is, and that'll keep me on track. So I outline, but I do it.
You're not a slave to it.
I do it in a dirty, dirty-handed kind of like bags of topsoil way. So
in an American Midwest way. I love it.
Perfect.
Nate, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
What a joy. The book, the first installment of N.D. Wilson's new fantasy adventure series, Outlaws of Time, The Legend of Sam Miracle, is available at bookstores everywhere. You can find more out on STORYENTED.com. Now, finally, earlier this year, we brought you an exclusive interview with Joseph Fiennes, the star of the film Risen. In it, Joseph plays a Roman centurion who arrives at a crossroads when he's tasked to investigate what's happened to the body of a man following a crucifixion. On May 24th, Risen arrives in stores on DVD. Here's an exclusive peek at what you can expect.
The film is a murder mystery, and then that mystery becomes an even greater theological mystery.
Sort of a new take on the New Testament story of the resurrection for a contemporary audience.
The idea of seeing it through the eyes of a non-believer, of Claudius, in this sort of genre style, it just worked really well.
And the power of faith, where you really start to see how powerful faith is and how something that you thought is true all your life can just turn on its head and it can change you forever.
Risen, starring Joseph Fiennes, is available at stores everywhere and online on May 24th.